Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Really excited to get started on how to prepare for an SQF audit with Allera. And we will start just with intros and then really dive in. So Devon, I'll pass it to you. Would love to hear, introduce yourself and maybe a little bit about why you work in food.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Devon. I work at Hammonds Candies. We specialize in hard candies, soft candies like marshmallow and taffy and caramels, as well as popcorn. We supply nationwide and into Canada as well. I've been with Hammonds for just about 3 years now. Prior to this, I have experience in the organic dairy industry. I really got started sort of in the quality realm working at a poultry farm. So I was on the farm side of things, so not directly related, but I did gain experience there with audits. Realized that I enjoyed audits, as crazy as that sounds, and very like high pressure, but very rewarding once you get through it. And after that, I went on to the dairy. That's what really got my foot in the door on the QA side of things. And I knew I wanted to pursue that. So I carried on in that direction at Hammonds.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining, Devon. My name is Patty, and I'm the founder at Allera. And we work with companies to go digital with QA documentation, trend analysis, analyze it, and then automate supplier management as well. And really the goal for this is just to host more conversations around food safety and quality, share ideas. And so this focus is how to prepare for an SQF audit and doing so with Allera as well. So we'll start, Devon. We always start with the question, if you could only eat one food on a desert island for the rest of your life, what would it be?
I think I would have to go with sushi. That's kind of my go-to. Like, I would never get sick of it.
Yeah. Sushi on a desert island would be great. My answer would, I think I'd go with smoothies. I think really lean into the tropical side of things. Yeah, something smooth too.
But in both cases, you can probably like harvest from the island, right?
Yes, exactly.
Do some fishing, get some fruit off the trees.
Keep it local.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I guess also as people are trickling in, if anyone wants to comment where they're coming in from, those will trickle in. There's a little delay for Devon and I, but we'll jump in. Devon, would love to hear you gave a little bit about your background starting on the farm, moving to dairy. But I guess before you were using Allera, what did it look like to prepare for an SQF audit?
So my first audit here at Hammonds, everything was paper, and not just SQF, but some other audits as well that we went through. And it just involves so many binders, and it's very, I don't know, it's just a little bit mentally exhausting when you're going page by page through forms and checking to make sure everything is filled out correctly. I think the biggest headache is, people are going to fill out paperwork a little bit differently each, depending on the operator. So while they're collecting all the same data, they might write one thing or another just slightly different. And then when you're reviewing that and trying to explain it also to an auditor who's reviewing it, I feel like it just causes a lot more conversation than really needs to happen. And anytime during an audit, you don't really want to have to over explain things. You want things to go really smoothly. So that was the headache I was running into.
Yeah. And what were your best practices at that point? Like, what you said you like audits, and obviously you do really well on them. How did you prepare? Like, what was the best practices for someone, let's say it's their first SQF audit? What would be the tips you'd give?
Make sure you do a good internal audit. That is key because you want to find the problem before the auditor does, and you want to make any necessary corrections before an auditor sees an issue. And then, you're having to supply a corrective action report externally. Much easier to handle things in-house and catch those problems before they turn into something bigger. So definitely, I think that's been a big lesson is don't do an internal audit just to get it done. Make sure you're actually getting the full value out of it. Go through the full process, involve all the members of your team that you can. That's something that can sometimes be a bit challenging because not everyone wants to do internal audits. What I found in that is that the people that were probably the most resistant to participating in the internal audits actually brought the most value because I think they were more nervous about it at the end of the day. And so they ended up preparing for it, asking me really good, challenging questions that hadn't necessarily come up before. So I think that has really brought the most value to our practices.
Yeah, that's great. And I think something about you, Devon, is you're so in touch with every part of the facility, whether it's shipping, receiving, or people on the floor, that it makes sense that you're saying, hey, let's bring as many people in. What did those conversations look like? You said sometimes people were nervous. How did you make it comfortable where people can come in and ask good questions so that you can be proactive?
Yeah, so I conducted an in-house internal auditing training for our whole food safety team, which, they're familiar. Again, it was something in the past where we had enough covered to meet requirements, but were we really getting value out of that process? Maybe not so much. And so what we've built up is making sure that everyone is getting the same internal auditing training that I'm required to have so that they actually know what I'm talking about when I say we need to do these internal audits. And then giving lots of time to prep. So not trying to cram them all in into like a week before your audit window, but give yourself a little bit of time. We did an opening meeting where we just covered, hey, these are the expectations of the internal audits. You've all had this training, so here's some reminders from that training of how we should move forward with these. Here's the expectations, and then allowing people to plan like weeks in advance so that they have enough time to review the requirements and have their questions prepared. Also giving myself extra time to review things and make sure things are straightened out.
Yeah, wow, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, just speaking the same language, it sounds like, and giving yourself a lot more time. Yeah, that sounds like a great approach. And then, so just for people, I mean, you guys went digital with Allera, and how did your approach change when you switched to going digital for an audit?
A lot less binders on the table when it came time to sit down with the auditor. So I actually have my metal detector binder here. So I don't know if you can see it very
Oh
clearly,
yeah,
but
wow, that
it's
is a
like the
monster.
big, and that's like less than a year worth of just metal detector forms. So there's still certain things that are always going to be on paper because they need signatures or things like that. Like our food safety plan is always going to be printed out and hand signed, right? But so we're still showing some of those things, but it was a lot less scrambling through paperwork. And for me, I think that just creates like a calmer environment during the audit. It was nice to just be able to pull things up on the computer and calmly filter out what we're looking for and pull up the correct form. It just created like a less frantic environment.
And how was it like with the prep, with bringing in other employees or just the internal audit that you were doing? Like, did it allow you to be more proactive?
Well, I think it was a good opportunity for other people on our team to see what I see when I'm reviewing forms. So we have people really familiar with submitting the forms, but they don't necessarily know the other side of it, which is when I go through and review everything or send something back for that needs revisions, things like that. And like the biggest thing is people in certain departments not realizing what we do in areas that they don't directly work in. So being able to show that, and when they say like, somebody in production says, oh, well, how does receiving document this? I have no idea. And then being able to just pull up Allera really quickly and show them. And on the prepping side of things, it was easier to just get like a broad scan of things. I already knew because I'd already approved forms. But what Allera allows us to do is make sure things are filled out very consistently. So I didn't really have to worry as much about double checking things and saying, okay, like, let me make sure that nobody missed their initials on something because they wouldn't be able to submit the form without that, right? So that made things a little bit easier.
Yeah,
For sure.
no, that's awesome. Even sometimes when I'm demoing and submitting forms, I'm like, oh man, I didn't, fill this form out. So always makes it easier. Then you can, just keep everyone on the same track.
Mm-hmm.
And for you, what were you nervous about? I think it's totally normal to be like, hey, we've been doing this way for, decades sometimes. What were you most nervous about in that first audit with using Allera?
Yeah, I think it was just a matter of like I'd gone through everything in my head. It's like I don't see any issue with this, but what if I'm forgetting something? What if I'm not taking something into consideration? So, which is really just like normal audit jitters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just they're always going to be there no matter what.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if I remember right, you guys were kind of implementing us a little bit, and then
Mhm.
you got some feedback from the auditor. Is that right? Kind of before you fully switched?
Yeah. So, I mean, the big thing before we had fully switched over, we had other inspections, not necessarily SQF, but last year's SQF, we kind of told them, hey, we're going to be switching to this. The feedback was all very positive, very along the lines of like, yeah, that's kind of the direction people are going. And we've seen that in other companies, and that's totally fine. Um, and and yeah, so that's kind of been the feedback from other audits, is that like, yeah, it's going to be less like labor with all the paperwork and all the binders for you guys. I think I think my other thing I was nervous about is like there are people who do like to see paper filled out to an
Yeah.
extent. They're maybe a little bit more old school. But I think at the end of the day, it was just facilitates everything to have it digitized.
Yeah. No, that definitely makes sense. And so going into your first audit, what were you most excited about? Obviously, you're nervous about, the normal jitters, but what were you most excited about going into it?
Yeah, well, I was kind of excited. Like it felt like kind of showing off a little bit. Like, oh, look at us, we're doing something a little new. Like we're progressing in this direction. There's also the aspect that it's much more sustainable to eliminate paperwork, and that's always a nice forward-thinking way for a business to go.
Yeah.
So that's what I was excited about. I was like, look at this fancy new toy that we have, and
Yeah.
here's how we're using it. So that was good.
You're like, we are a very modern company.
Yeah, exactly.
No, that is great. And then how the process actually unfold, like when day of the audit, what was the biggest difference or some of the differences you felt as far as a layer audit versus pen and paper?
Yeah, so I think I kind of touched on this before, but just was a calmer environment. Our audit, I mean, every auditor is a little different, right? So some of them get everything on the floor done on the first day and then stay in the conference room or in the office the rest of the time. The auditor we had this year split up their time each day of the audit, which is 3 days for us. And so each day it'd be a little bit of time on the floor, then back in the office, and that back and forth, but like not having to worry about, okay, do I have everything in the conference room as far as paperwork goes? Not having to stress about that. It made things a lot more relaxed. And those moments where obviously you don't show the nerves, but those moments when an auditor says, okay, like, let me see this report from this random day from this random product. You always have that sense of like, oh my gosh, like this better be here where it's supposed to be. And it was just way more relaxed to just type it in on Allera and voila, there's the form.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and hopefully it made it at least, there's always going to be the jitters, but hopefully it was at least a little smoother
Mm-hmm.
and transitioning from the floor and back, and kind of just leave your laptop there and feel good.
Yep. Yep.
No, that's great. We like to do a trivia question, Devon. So we'll give you a breather because I feel like we've really
Okay.
been grilling you. But I will share my screen, and then let me see here. The trivia question is, let me know, can you see that all right? Oh yeah, there we go. So trivia, it's for $100 gift card. So Devon, you really get the first crack at this, and everyone else can just comment as needed, and we'll sift through whoever comments first. We'll track them down later. But which state produces the most cranberries?
Oh, I feel like I read this recently. I get to answer, right?
Yeah,
I
go
get to
for
try?
it.
Okay. Oh, I read this recently and now I can't think of it. I know it's somewhere northern and I can't remember if it's in like the middle of the country or the northeast. Um, I want to say, is it? I don't know. I'm trying to think.
Throw it out. There's no, well, there is a wrong answer, but
Yeah.
nothing, can't get hurt by trying.
Um,
And everyone else will be commenting their answer as we go.
I don't think this is it, but I'm gonna say Massachusetts.
It is Wisconsin.
Okay.
To the heartland.
Okay.
I think I
Yeah.
saw that there was like 50% of cranberries come from Wisconsin.
Okay. I knew it was up
Yep.
north. I just couldn't remember like which other region. That's good.
Great. That's always good to get a little breather from all the SQF talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess jumping back into it, and I see people are commenting. Dinesh guessed Massachusetts as well. But yeah, jumping back in, and I guess for you, kind of, what did the auditor say on that first audit? Walking through using Allera.
Yeah. So I, again, very receptive to it, very much like unfazed, I would say.
Yeah.
For us it's very new, but I think the auditors are seeing this trend in businesses going digital, and so they're like, yeah, okay, great, show me your forms. I noticed that I felt like I had to explain less when reviewing the paperwork. I think it was just a little bit more black and white when they were reviewing forms. Whereas,
Yeah.
obviously, any auditor, there's going to be things that you have to explain in detail because they don't know how your processes yet. And you should be able to explain everything as if they were starting work that day and explain how we do things. But I just felt like reviewing the digital forms was easier for them to just understand everything at a glance, whereas sometimes paper forms, it's like, oh well, like, why did this person write this note here? It was just very clear for them to look at the paperwork. I did a little bit of explaining on like, oh, this is why we do it like this. Explain like troubleshooting, if this happens, if X, Y, and Z happens, here's how we respond. And she seemed to grasp things very quickly, so that was good.
Yeah, that's awesome. Anytime you can avoid questions from auditors, it feels like a smoother process all around.
Yep, definitely.
No, that sounds great. I guess we have one more question, and obviously if anyone has any questions in the crowd, feel free to fire away. But one that comes to mind is, I guess, what advice would you give to anyone that is using Allera? How to prepare for an audit with Allera?
So, I think one big thing is just making sure that your operators really grasp the importance of reporting things on time and understand how those forms will be reviewed.
Yeah.
Operators that are actually doing the completion of the forms, they know it's a rule and they know it's required, but making sure they understand why it's a rule and why it really matters. Definitely, we had tablets on the floor so that they could demonstrate for the auditor how they complete certain checks each day.
Oh,
That went
wow.
that went very smoothly, so that was all really easy. I also think it was kind of easier for them to show. It seemed like it, from my perspective, anyways, to show them on the tablet how they record everything versus filling it out on paper. And yeah, I think that's like the one challenge is when you go digital, you're getting a more accurate representation of when forms are filled out and completed, which to me is good, right? Because that makes you a stronger company in the long run. But making sure that on the other side of that, the operators understand, like, hey, there's a timestamp here, we're going to see every little detail of how you filled out this form, and this is what they're going to be looking for. And luckily for us, that all went very well. But I would say that that's like one thing that we learned in advance that we need to stress.
Yeah, it's like it does bring accountability, and honestly,
Yeah.
some companies might not want
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
But like you said, it is a good thing, and it just builds a muscle for operators to know that the time actually does matter.
Exactly. Yeah. And definitely over the past year that we've been using Allera, we've seen so much growth in that department, like from our team leads and making sure that they're staying accountable and staying on top of those things, which is always really good to see.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
great. Well, we will open it up for any attendees to fire off any questions. There is a little bit of a delay. So we will have to fill the time here, but now's the time if you've got burning questions while we got Devon on the line. But yeah, I guess in the meantime, Devon, as those are potentially trickling in, I'd love to hear, like, not just for an SQF audit, but for customer audits. We've heard from people that they want to go digital because maybe a customer is requiring it, or they just want to, like you said, like have a more modern appeal to maybe bigger customers. Do you
Mhm.
find that when your customers come in, is it that same expectation of like, oh yeah, people are going digital, or are they like, wow, this is new, or what's kind of the feedback from customers?
Yeah, so we have two customers in Canada, and they require a ton of documentation from us. It's one buyer and then two customers that they direct things to. They ask for probably more than anybody else. These ones I'm thinking of in particular,
Yeah.
and usually it involves so much scanning of paperwork and getting to them, and then I'm trying to make sure, like, is this actually legible? Are they going to be able to understand this when we send it over to them? Because we don't want too much back and forth with them, because we know they really like things a certain way. And so this time, for instance, the metal detector forms, they require to see that for their product every single check. And so this year, I was able to just download the forms from Allera, send it all in a little zip file, and to me, I felt like it looked more professional, honestly, to be
Yeah.
able to send documents that way. And which is, you always want that for your customers. You want to look like you have your stuff together and everything. So, and it was just like very cohesive that way. They could very clearly see like when their products were tested and each verification. So, that definitely got good feedback. Same thing with quality and weight checks and things like that, for the same customer. The paper form that we had used, it wasn't like, it was legible, but it looked a little bit chaotic. Whereas having it on Allera, it's just like nicer to look at, which I think that they appreciate.
Yeah, no
Mhm.
sugar or whatever else is flying around in the factory
Yeah,
on it.
exactly. Yeah.
Great. No, that sounds great. It's always good to, obviously, SQF is very important, but then also how your customers view you as well when they're coming in and touring is really important.
Definitely.
Um, Great. Well, Devin, it doesn't look like we've got any questions flying in from the attendees. So thank you so much for taking the time to, yeah, share your knowledge on how to prep for an SQF audit, and just for obviously using Allera and giving us a bunch of feedback. So everyone watching, go buy some Hammonds candies.
Yeah, no problem. It was fun to hop on. And yeah, I'm an open book. So, if anyone watching has follow up questions later on, just feel free to shoot me a message. I don't mind that at all.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you, Devin. I will wrap up the stream right now.
Okay, bye.